because I feel like Eric is the expert. Great chance for you to meet the board, and we look forward to seeing you at that event tonight. And it isn't formal, it's just social, and it kind of has the feeling that we had last night. And thank you for those of you who came last night. KRISTEN Bell was wonderful. It was great to hear some of her perspective, and it was a great reminder of what we're doing in the classroom and why we need to continue teaching even in these circumstances. So with that, I'm going to call I'm going to adjourn our meeting. Do I have someone? I love doing this. Does someone want to motion to adjourn the meeting and someone to second? I don't think we really need to vote on that, but it's there. So moved. Thank you, Amanda. And thank you, Robin, for your second. I appreciate that. That was the end of our business meeting. We are a couple minutes early. Do we have any questions? Okay, well, let's just go ahead and continue. I have the honor to introduce our morning keynote speaker, Claudia Alick. Claudia is a performer, producer, and intersectional inclusion expert who has been helping individuals and organizations achieve performances of justice for decades. Named by American Theater Magazine as one of the 25 theater artists who will shape American theater in the next 25 years, Alick has served as the founding artistic director of Smoke and Word Productions, is an NY Neo-Futurist alum, published playwright, recipient of the NYC Fresh Fruit Directing Award, TEDx speaker, featured on HBO's Deaf Poetry Jam, and recipient of the MRG Lilla Jewel Award for Women Artists, the 2019 Oakland Poetry Slam team, Crew Revolution co-founder, managing theater folks of color, serves as co-president of the board of Network of Ensemble Theater and the board of Northwest Art Streaming Hub. Collaborates with the Unsettling Dramaturgy, CRIP and Indigenous International Digital Colloquium, and Howl Around Advisory Council. During her decade as community producer at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, she produced events such as award-nominated The Green Show, the Daedalus Project, and directing audio plays such as the Grammy-nominated Hamlet. Claudia currently serves as founding executive producer of the transmedia social justice company Calling Up, whose projects include producing in pandemic, the Every 28 Hours play, We Charge Genocide TV, the Justice Producers Collaborative, the Justice Quilt, co-artistic direction of the Build Convening, digital design of 2020, the Festival of Masks, in addition to consulting and advising funders and companies around the country. She is producing performance of justice online, on stage, and in real life. And that is an incredible bio. So without further delay, please welcome our keynote speaker for this morning, Claudia Alick.
Thank you so much. Oh, that was so beautiful. My friends, since our activities are shared digitally, before we officially begin, let's take a moment to consider the legacy of colonization embedded within technological structures, including the equipment and high-speed internet, which are not available in many indigenous and marginalized communities. So we offer our care and gratitude to the land, water, and air, and support indigenous-led learning and teaching practices. Google and Zoom are headquartered in what is now called San Jose, California, which is the traditional lands of the Ohlone and Tamien peoples. We acknowledge that much of our work takes place on stolen and unceded territories, that settler colonizers and slavers from Europe used stolen and enforced labor of African people to subsequently develop that land. We honor the lives of all who endured and continue to endure in the face of settler colonialism and white supremacy. I invite you all to join us in acknowledging all of this, as well as our shared responsibility to make good of this time together, and for each of us to consider our roles in reconciliation and decolonization. At this moment, I invite you to, if you feel you are able to, please feel free to acknowledge the land on which you stand in the chat. And please forgive me, this is my access check-in. I might be coughing a little bit as I do this speech. It's still smoky. where I am in California. My friends in American theater, may I call you my friends? We act so friendly when we see each other. Like we hug a lot, don't we? We actively love so many of the same things. Is that why we, like when we meet, we immediately act lovingly towards each other? Or is it something that we have practiced at and trained at? You know, is it part of the implicit script of producing American theater that we perform in these certain ways with each other, even when we're not acting? We have so much in common. We share so much. We have embodied so many of the same stories. I would love for you to all just take a moment and think about how many plays that you have produced or directed or been in or designed for or built for or worked on or taught or read. How many of the same stories have we been in? Maybe not in the same shared physical space, but how many of the shared stories have we been in together? How many stories have we been producing together? And we've practiced, many of us, for decades to refine and to create this practice of cultural producing. We produce American culture, y'all. That's rather magnificent. I think that you are rather magnificent, my friends. I hope that I can call you my friends. I'm here today also because we're educators, which is even more impressive. Not only combining documentary history and the imaginary to capture what it ultimately is to be human, but then we facilitate that practice. We share that practice in others so that this practice can be repeated generationally. That's how you build culture. That's how you maintain culture. And what we do is not easy, my friends. The diverse skill sets that you inculcate in others, the diverse skill sets that are required in cultural producing. I'm just going to name a couple: empathy, transformation, organization, building, like literal construction, communication, surprisingly, so much math. All of these skills are transferable to other industries. What we do is so valuable. What you do is of deep and significant value. And it takes practice and passing it along. It is taught. And we have a lot of teachers that we can think back to who have helped us to do what we are doing today. And now we have this amazing opportunity to connect the dots, to gather, to reflect on what we've done in the past, what we're doing right now, and what we plan on doing for the future. I mean, to a certain extent, I feel like that's what a conference always is. And well, I encourage us to take this exercise seriously, this exercise that we will be doing with each other over the next few days. And I also encourage us to approach this exercise with a spirit of positivity. And I also acknowledge that approaching all of this with a spirit of positivity is hard. It is difficult. So many of us are exhausted and have not been getting enough rest. I see you. Many of us are not working with enough resources to teach with or live on. I see you. Many of us are now simultaneously balancing home care and professional duties. I see you. I see that many of us are essential and are in public spaces because that has been deemed necessary. And I see that some of us are unable to leave our homes for safety. And some of us have homes that have been burnt to the ground. And some of us are struggling to even have a home. And many of us have been living in the conditions of stress for months. And some of us are being killed at very high rates by officers of the state. And over 200,000 of us have died. And over 7 million of us are sick. We are in the midst of several pandemics. The coronavirus pandemic has many of us stretching our skill sets into new areas, creating digital, new safe practices in remote communication and connection. stretching the boundaries of what we understand as liveness. We have a pandemic of climate crisis where fires are burning and extreme storms are raging and infrastructure is failing. We have a pandemic of supremacy culture, snowballing to create a community so full of racism and ableism and sexism and greed and denial that I can rightfully say that right now we are all living in the conditions of genocide. And I am still telling you to approach this exercise with the lens of positivity, my friends. I hope I can call you my friends. We must have this lens of positivity, the supremacist culture. And when I say that term, I am saying a culture of heterosexism, ableism, gender discrimination, racism, and white domination. This supremacy culture has an aesthetic of inequity. This supremacy culture is apocalyptic in nature. It is cynicism. It is a lack of faith in the possibilities of humanity. It is a limitation of imagination. And at its core, supremacy culture requires a lens of narrowness and negativity. So we must approach this with the lens of positivity, even as we acknowledge that we have spent so much time centering and telling the stories of white men. This is true. Telling others that white men's stories were more important and better than anybody else's stories because we've been telling them over and over and over again for so many years, and we loved them so much. We create classics. We choose what will be classic. We have been telling stories that misrepresent or erase the experience of disabled people. We have been creating theater spaces that have disallowed disabled people from creating inside of them. We have had spaces that didn't have intimacy direction or consent culture. And we have had spaces where actors have experienced harm. We have made casting choices or curatorial choices that have replicated the power dynamics of the stories that we tell. Creating the circumstances where some people would never be able to get as much practice in this field of cultural producing, this thing that we love so much. And my friends, I know that we're not going to let ourselves tell ourselves a lie that I just said the stories that we've been telling are bad stories. I simply observed that the stories we created and the way we produced them were limited, and they limited the imagination and possibilities for ourselves and all of those who are creating those stories with us. My friends, some of us will be tempted to say that if we cannot do theater in the way that we used to, we can't do theater at all. But that's not true. Some of us will say that if we cannot be physically in the same space, well, it isn't even theater. Some of us will be afraid that if we acknowledge or begin to dismantle this supremacy culture, that will somehow be undoing ourselves, that we will be destroying this thing that we love, or that somehow someone's being attacked when we are saying that we want something new. But we know that's not true. That's a lens of negativity. Supremacy culture posits change as impossible because they do not want anything to change for the better. The most political act is in maintaining the status quo. They want us to fear change. They want us to resist change. They want us to deny that change is even necessary. Now, we all know that the industry of the American theater, it was sick. This was knowledge that we held before we were trapped inside our homes with this current sickness. For most of my career, the conversation has always been in my spaces, how do we save the American theater, which has been defunded in education? How do we save our theater education programs? And yet, it is only recently that we have begun having these conversations that speak to the most deeply held chronic conditions of our field, of our education systems, and of our culture as a whole. Now, when you use the lens of positivity, you recognize that we are currently in the midst of saving the American theater. That's what's happening right now, right this minute. That's what y'all are doing. That's the exercise. We are transforming, adapting, evolving, and growing our educational and cultural producing practices to be truly inclusive. I recognize that it might be tempting to tell ourselves a story about the good things we did in the past and try and say, well, if we need to do something better, that means what we did in the past was bad. But that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is we must reach beyond the limitations of the negative imagination of supremacy culture. So let's lean into the positivity of the liberatory imagination. Now, at this point in our keynote speech, I'm going to take us on a field trip. If we were in a physically shared space, I would have you all leave your bags and everything and come stand up and walk out of the auditorium with me. So here we are, walking out of the auditorium. We're going to see if I do this correctly. And I am taking you to the space of producing in pandemic. I began producing in pandemic as a peer exchange session in March with a very multi-talented director and Syrian refugee Khulud Sawaf. It is an anti-capitalist, non-hierarchical, and non-institutional peer exchange space, which we created specifically, and you'll have to forgive me, I'm trying to make two things happen on my screen at the same time, which is super fun. We created this space specifically because I was concerned that there was going to be some spaces of education that were inaccessible to others. We were concerned that there would be some spaces that would be inaccessible because people couldn't afford it. We were concerned that there would be some spaces that were inaccessible because people were not officially students and were not thinking that they could perform in spaces as a learner because they were not officially students. We were concerned that there were spaces where people would be unable to learn because we were trying to teach something and invent something as we were teaching it. So we created this peer exchange space. And I'm going to share right now some of the people in that space who have taught me. This is Peter Kuo. Peter Kuo is an educator at ACT in the MFA program, and he shared with us his exercise producing Madhuri Shankar's Love and Warcraft.
Oh, right, I was actually very intentional to make it off. I think that very first scene.
What I love is that I was actually watching this. Let's see if we can, there we go.
It actually helped establish the audience so that they knew that they were looking through people's devices.
In this scene, I wanted to highlight two of the wonderful things that were taught in this section. In this scene, we had actors in different physical spaces, but by using set design, they were able to act as if they were in the same shared physical space. It reminded me of doing exercises in acting class where the actor would be far on the other side of the stage, but we'd have to act as if we were very close together and we'd have this really intense energy going between us. This was live. And this production that began as a classroom experiment to make sure the students would have the ability to actually get their full educational experience and do their play, this actually became a national touring project. And I highlight this because he gave me the term video theater, and I like it a lot. That this is theater, this is acting, this is live, but it's with actors that are in different spaces. The next section that I wanted to, or the next artist I wanted to share with you was Khulud Sawaf, who joined, how are we doing on sound? I just heard something. Are we okay? All right, excellent. So the next thing that I'm sharing with you is a section with Khulud Sawaf, who is based in Arkansas. And Khulud shared with us a practice called Curbside Theater. And with Curbside Theater, they were producing, let's see if we can get to that. I might be skipping around too much. Let's see if we, oh wait, no, I'm actually sharing with you Dancing Earth. So this is Dancing Earth, Rulan Tagan Theater Company, and this is Ian Garrett. Go ahead and share the screen with us, Ian Garrett. Thank you so much.
So here you can actually, you can view the entire thing, and I'm going to jump around a little bit. So what we're ultimately doing with this is...
and I'm going to pause and just summarize all the beautiful teachings that were in that, but I'm hoping that you got to see just a little bit of that dance. So this was an international exchange with dancers in different international locations. This piece was Indigenous Futurities. So Dancing Earth is an Indigenous dance and ensemble theater company. And in this piece, they were, again, using liveness. So this was live singing, live music making, live dancing, using Skype, Zoom, and OBS to bring all of the performers into a shared physical space. So the visual affect for us, the audience, was seeing them all in the same space dancing, but they were all in their own spaces. They had a limited budget and they spent their money on green screens. And again, through their performance and their virtuosity, they were able to create a integrated performance for all of us. And they were working with extreme latency. So the amount of thoughtfulness of each of those performers as they saw through their screen that their timing had to be a little bit different because of the latency of the internet, so that what we saw was them dancing together. But what they were doing was doing something that was actually cognitively quite complicated and fascinating. All right, so I am now scrolling to get us to, let's see, Curbside Theater in Arkansas, which was physically shared space. Now, in Producing in Pandemic, we are exploring several different ways of creating theater. We're trying to not only lean into transmedia platforms and ways of exchange that are online, but we're also looking at the ways we can once again share space physically together. And with Curbside Theater, what we were fascinated by...
33 variations, and we started really doing the work in our apartments and doing...
All right, I'm just going to skip to this. So they began first working as individuals far apart. And then they began, as they were going through all of the different phases, figuring out how they could finally share space in a physical space. They performed outdoors in people's front lawns. It was door-to-door delivery theater. And for the audience, it was an exercise of really having agency and also practicing consent, because the performers would have the audience members sign something that let them know we are consenting to wearing masks. We are consenting to these shared ways of performing in the space together. The performers would then go into the lawn. The other beautiful piece was, in this piece, they integrated a LENTZ-ASL, a cartoon LENTZ-ASL, where they had a performer who was also cleaning everything. And that performer's masks were part of the costume, and the performers were cleaning and making the space one that could be shared safely with all. I'm next going to share with you, and I'm keeping an eye on the time.
Workshops, we had
oh, I see what's happening. I love this website.
Parts of the diaspora, and we held that from June all the way until mid-August. So that was around 8 weeks of workshops that we were holding regularly on Saturdays.
This website does a thing where it autoplays, and then it gives me this weird audio in the background. I love it. This actually gives me an opportunity to do a shout out to Sabina Uni, who was our, oh, is it still doing this weird sound thing?
They were
that's
our
fun.
youth arts.
Okay, we're gonna do this.
Were so fantastic to be mentored by Lindsay Glover, who is our videographer and editor, and also youth mentor, and Beth Peterson.
What I love is that we're about to, you're hearing Taran Moore's voice, so we're about to play that video. The website was actually created by our intern as an intern project, and I loved it so much that we just kept it, but it does have a couple of bugs. All right. So in episode 23, we are about to see Elizabeth Carter. Elizabeth Carter was directing a production of Lear for San Francisco Shakespeare Theater.
On the virtual format, you cannot. Just tell your producers, tell the playwright, tell anybody who's working with you, give me 3 times as much time, because you cannot do it in a short amount of time.
So this particular production was one where the actors were using green screens, and in a similar fashion to Dancing Earth's project, they were projected into a shared space using some wonderful technology that they then also shared with us, so we could see how people were collaborating remotely to create this shared experience. Again, this was in real time, so there was a liveness factor to it that helped to make it theater. The other beautiful thing, so we talked about, in that session, we talked about how you need more time to do this type of work digitally. You just need more time, and that's real reasonable. But the exercise of needing more time is actually a gigantic gift, because there are assumptions that are baked into the way that we do this. And sometimes slowing down and talking through all of the steps of the process can end up with really deep, beautiful learnings and better aesthetics, better art. The other thing that Elizabeth spoke to us about was her aesthetics were abstract. And she wondered, how do you create abstract aesthetics in the digital space? And of course, this was all about leaning into our designers. So these digital spaces need set design. These digital spaces require lighting design. And I'm just going to go backwards, because as we are sharing screens on here, it's always going to be giving me a little bit of drama. And in these digital spaces, we have so many different opportunities. This last project that I'm about to share with you, let's see, as we're going now, we always record our sessions and share them online so that we can be accessible asynchronously. We believe that that's deeply important, just given people's complicated schedules right now, and everything that is on their plates. We recognize that if we can have a space that is consistent where everybody can arrive, but you can also witness the work at another time. We're trying to be as accessible as possible to theater artists and theater creators who we recognize have a lot of different needs. We also run our space in a relaxed meeting style. I recognize that that's not how you're always going to want to run your spaces. Sometimes you need to have a space where everyone is highly engaged. But I find it super useful to have that conversation with your artist to say this meeting is relaxed. You can have cameras on, cameras off, participate at your level of capacity. So this last project was LA Commons Festival of Mass. This is Taran Moore.
So that was around 8 weeks of workshops that we were holding regularly on Saturdays. So Lindsay was in charge of this part, and I love our St. Cofa leaders, which are our youth arts cohort. If we want to share some sound, I think it would be awesome. They were our youth arts cohort who were so fantastic to be mentored by Lindsay Glover, who is our videographer and editor.
And I'm just going to pause so I can talk a little bit about the Festival of Masks. So the Festival of Masks was normally a culminating event around August or actually I think around July for this group. And it was a local event in LA that was celebrating the location of Leimert Park. And it was an event that reached out to the diaspora to connect the community, the African-American community, to our African roots. In this exercise, they would do mask making projects. And then in the day of the show, there would be a processional.
Youth mentor and
people with their masks
who was
doing these marchings. The new plan was the classes were done digitally over time. The drumming classes, the mask making classes, all these classes were done digitally. This did two things. This gave their community and their audience a chance every single week to get used to the digital path for how they got to the space. So they had familiarity. So they were gaining a shared vocabulary for the digital creation space. But this was about transmedia producing. The masks are a physical object. So this also required the teachers doing a lot of labor to deliver supplies to each of the students all over LA. Then when we did our performance, we were able to utilize video, and I'm just going to hit stop share right now. We were able to utilize video from that production as part of the final culminating event, as well as students live sharing their masks and artifacts. Ultimately, that was an exercise, I believe, in liberatory imagination. It was an event that included, again, it was hyperlocal and international. So it had, this year, actual live participation in audiencing from Africa. It had all of the audiencing and participation from audience members. Some audience members had very low technological access. So we had to figure out, oh, how do we create something where they will be able to see it on Facebook, see it on HowlRound, and also join us inside the Zoom for a more intimate audiencing experience. And the piece included protest. Why? Because that was the work that the participants were creating. So the drumming moment was a dance piece that also spoke to the death of George Floyd. And if we have time, I will share that video with you, or I will just leave you links so you can check it out for yourself. But Festival of Mask, LA Commons, just magnificent work. And I believe it was ultimately successful because we had to serve such a diverse constituency. And it was successful because it was ultimately an educational event, taking advantage of asynchronicity and also liveness. So I share all of these examples with you. And also I'm hoping that you've noticed that I have been very intentionally sharing the work of people of color. And we have so many possibilities. And each week I am getting inspired, not only by the folks that I'm meeting and producing in pandemic, but I'm being inspired by witnessing the work taking place in, there's a lot of different Facebook groups that are helping us to figure out how to do this new thing of creating theater and teaching theater and really connecting and helping students that are going through a lot right now. And I again repeat that we have to do this with a spirit of positivity. There are so many possibilities for our producing, my friends. Can I call you my friends? I've been calling you my friends this entire time, but can I call you my friends if you defend the ways of producing that have been harming us? Can I call you my friend if you're not speaking up to interrupt violence or harm? Can I call you my friend if you choose to protect the status quo over the needs of a student? Can I call you my friend if this speech act that I am doing here causes you to act as if I were your enemy? We act so friendly with each other. We love so many of the same things and have so many of the same shared experiences. You've already been showing me all the sacrifices and the extraordinary work that you do with your communities. And I truly have so much faith in you. I have faith that we can save ourselves and save this thing that we call American theater and really serve our students. So my friends, I end with opening this conversation up for questions and answers and an invitation for short dialogue now and more dialogue in the future as we continue to save American theater and save ourselves. Thank you so much for joining me in my little speech that was about producing with positivity in pandemic. And now, go right ahead, please, sir.
No, I just wanted to thank you, and I wanted to invite everyone to ask questions in the Q&A section of Zoom. You'll see that at the bottom of your screen. But you know, as an educator, and obviously I'm going to, I am a white male, and you know, teaching students of color in many ways. But what do you think right now is going to be the most important thing we can be doing in the classroom for our students at this time?
Well, I believe that right now, like one of the amazing things that we are teaching everyone is communications, how to understand how a story is constructed, how a story is embodied, what that story is doing with people and to people. I believe that that's a very important skill set for everyone to have in mind as we are experiencing a lot of storytelling that's taking place in a lot of spaces.
Excellent, excellent. Are there any other questions? For Claudia? I mean, it has been really eye-opening in many ways. And I love how you spoke about the deficits that also exist, that, you know, we switch from classroom education to online education and we expected everybody to have all of those tools. And the truth is they don't. So how, I mean, do you have any suggestions for how we work with students that are still, you know, not accessing the tools that they need in order to connect with other artists?
Yes. Well, you know, I think that a lot of us are thinking really hard about this right now, trying to figure out, and it's incredibly complicated, sharing resources in the midst of pandemic, when literally sharing a space could actually be sharing germs, right? Yeah. But we have been talking about where are the places where we can connect and have students be able to share devices? Where are the places where people can go to a central location for connectivity if the space that they are in, because of the racism choices made by the city, if the place where they are at literally doesn't have the wiring, doesn't have Wi-Fi, because like they just don't have the connectivity. What are some of the things that we can thoughtfully start working on? And also being deeply aware that we're on the front lines. You're on the front lines. You're hearing from your students. So you're seeing and feeling the needs immediately. So that means oftentimes all of the infrastructure that's needed to really respond to that, it hasn't been created yet. So this is about mutual aid. This is about connecting with parents. This is about connecting with other teachers and exchanging as many things as possible. I'm also going to acknowledge that there's all these amazing things happening in the chat. I'm missing all of it.
Okay. I will catch you up on it. Gail Caswell, who is our president-elect, wants to know how we can continue to collaborate with you beyond today.
I love that. Although my encouragement is for you to take this exchange that you've had with me and then do it in your own spaces. You don't need to do it with me. You're already doing it, and you can do it. And there are so many leaders who are already in your community. There are already leaders where maybe there's some folks who you aren't thinking of as a leader that could be helping to teach, that could be helping to inform your practice. Ultimately, you can always go to claudiaalick.com or producinginpandemic.com or wechargegenocide.tv. I'm very easy to find on the internet. You just Google Claudia Alick, A-L-I-C-K, and a lot of stuff comes up.
All great things. I've done that several times. Marjorie Trieger, who is one of our arts leaders down in San Diego, not only wants to know what your background is to getting where you are today, but also what were your most formative experiences that led you to this point?
Well, my goodness, I feel like that's another speech. Our lived experience truly do inform our expertise. So I'm a highly educated woman, I really am. But I also came from a family that highly valued education. So I came from a family that had lots of books. And also my mother recognized that in some of the spaces I was in, they were going to miseducate me. So I would go home, I'd let her know, this is what happened to me in school today. And then she'd let me know, your teacher was lying to you. You're very, very smart. You're very intelligent. And this is how we're gonna, and it was that exercise. I grew up in Montana. So a lot of my experiences formatively in early education were actually receiving people telling me, well, you know, we just don't want to get your expectations up, you know, them bringing their own implicit bias and miseducating me and not serving me as a student. But then luckily I had some teachers who were magnificent. I had one teacher who came into the classroom and said, you know what, this book isn't going to serve our educational purposes. And it was a US history class. He put the US history class book room down. He said, we're not going to mess with that. And then he started giving us actual articles that he had copied from his college textbooks. And that is what we learned with. And that was amazing. And he was the person who helped me start my Black Student Union in high school. So having teachers that helped to mentor my leadership, that was useful. But ultimately, my lived experience being a Black, disabled, queer woman in the United States, it informs a lot of this. The gift of growing up in Montana, but also being the daughter of an immigrant, and also having a huge chunk of my family in Memphis, Tennessee, being active in the civil rights movement. These are all things that inform me. But I also watch a lot of YouTube videos, y'all. A lot of YouTube videos. I love educating myself. I hope y'all are educating yourselves every single day.
Thank you very much for that. Cambria Graff, who's an educator in Orange County, wanted to know if you had any thoughts on how to make after-school programs more accessible to our diverse student populations, because she tends to have more diversity during the school day than after school. And some of that has to do with family work commitments or transportation commitments. But what are your thoughts on how to make those programs accessible?
So I had a program that I was teaching for youth, and I'm forgetting, we received some award, like the Sunshine Award, but I'm forgetting the details of this. I apologize for the beautiful people who helped to support us for like a year and a half. Because I was doing an intern program for high school students, and I was frustrated because only the most privileged students could say yes to my opportunity. Only the students who had a car and could get to me. So then I realized, oh, I need to have extra money to create equity so that some of these students can get some of this reimbursed. Some of these students have to take time off of work to come learn with me. So actually what I need to do is I have to come up with a stipend so that they are not losing money that generally is going to help their family to survive so they can do work with me. In terms of the digital practice, that's one of the reasons I make all the work asynchronously available. It's specifically because many of us are negotiating schedules that aren't under our own control because we have to make income for our families and our survival. And that means we can't necessarily be available when the class is happening. So how do we create structures that will allow for multiple entry points, multiple ways of participating? And I also feel like, ironically, the digital world, everyone coming to the digital world and remote interactions, it's made my world more accessible exponentially so many times because I'm disabled. So there were times where I physically couldn't get to the location. Now I can get to the location through my computer, and that's opened up a lot.
Excellent. Amanda Geezer, educator out of Orange County, wants to know, what has been the best mistake you have learned during pandemic producing? That's a great question. Best mistake.
Yes. Okay. So the best mistake I learned was, I learned two lessons. One was you can never rehearse enough. You can never rehearse everything enough. Just because you text something 3 weeks ago and you're like, oh, that all worked, you should always test it all again every single time you do it. But the second lesson I learned was, even when the technology fails, if the people are there and the theater is authentic, the experience is magnificent. So those were two beautiful lessons that I learned. And I would say a third lesson that I've learned is this is all possible now. Like if you had, I was experimenting with this 2.5 years ago because I started a transmedia social justice company specifically because I was forecasting this would be something that we needed globally. I just didn't realize we would need it so quickly. But if you talked to me 2 years ago, I would have said, well, I'm not sure if I can have a theatrical exchange with people where I feel like we have given each other comfort, where I feel like I've had where they've made me cry, where they've made me laugh. I don't know if we can recreate the magic that we make when we're in physically shared space. I don't know if I can feel that magic energy that I feel sometimes between other audience members in the space. Mm-hmm. And I have learned that it is all possible. It is all possible. It just takes rehearsal and practice, and we're working it out.
Excellent. Carol Hovey, a past president of CETA, wants to know how we show our allyship to our students.
Yes. Well, I'm trying to remember this beautiful quote from the Indigenous sisters. If you have come to help me, I'm misquoting it right now. It's if you come to help me, you can go. But if you come to help yourself, if you think that your liberation is tied up with mine, then we can work together. So I feel like that's the key. If you are like, oh, I'm going to help you solve your problems, you're not an actual ally. If you recognize that their problem is your problem, that your student that is struggling to make class, struggling financially, that these are all shared issues. And in many ways, the pandemic has created a crisis culture that's made that really apparent for a lot of us, that many of us are actually in the same living conditions as a lot of our students. Now I say this, and I don't want you to put down that bag of acknowledging your privilege. It's good to recognize the immense privileges we have. I'm bringing into the spaces the privileges of being highly educated and having a family that's been educating me since I was born. I'm coming with the immense privilege of having all this technology and the ability to use it to communicate. So I don't want you to forget that you have those privileges, but if you can remember that the problems that your student is working to solve, that's your problem. And you're helping to save your own life when you are helping to save their problem. I feel like that's how you become a real authentic ally.
Excellent. We have one last question, and I think it's something that we all have dealt with at some point in our careers, producing and directing or starting programs. And that is from Elaine Byrne, who says, I'm starting an after-school drama club and I only have 2 girls who are in it so far, ! What would you do with them? 2 female students only, and what would you do with them?
Well, generally with all of my classes, I practice non-hierarchical leadership. So I turn it to the room and I say, hey, space, hey, room, how are we doing? Do we like this? What do we want to change? What do we want to do? And I give a lot of agency and power to my students to decide, what are we going to learn? How well are we learning it? And how can we improve those learnings? I don't ultimately understand all of the goals or the population of the students that you're working with, but I feel like they have things that they can teach and tell you. Now, I also want to say that in terms of this entire project of trying to do this better, no one is asking you to have a checklist of being like, did I get this community and this community and this? Like, that's not the exercise. The exercise is actually more global and it's a little deeper. Like, how are you engaging with your students to say, hey, where are the places where injustice is happening? And how can we make our practice not replicate that injustice? That might mean really telling explicitly stories that are about justice. That answer is one you get to discover with your students. Ultimately, though, if you are not producing with justice centered, you're producing with injustice implicitly centered. So I look forward to you all taking that mantle and moving forward with it. Again, this is good news, though. Like, I'm excited about your programs and all of the work that you're going to be doing.
Claudia, thank you so much for taking the time this morning to meet with us. I know these topics are very important topics to us as educators, as we develop our own allyship with our students and our communities. And I just appreciate the opportunity to listen to how you are doing that in the real world. Do you have any last words before we move on to our next event?
My last words are, if you liked this speech, share it with someone. If there's something you learned from this speech, share it with someone and keep doing the work that you are doing. You are magnificent. Your work is vital and important. And I see you and I appreciate you and I love you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Claudia. We really appreciate you being here today. So with everybody else who is still online, our next session begins at 10:30 today with Jack Mitchell, who will be talking about career and technical education, as well as Dr. Eric ENGDAHL, who will be talking about the California Theater Credential, followed by some Q&A. So definitely 2 very important topics that I think are weighing on everybody's mind. So we have about a 15-minute break, and then we will get to the next session. Good morning, everybody, and I hope you have a fantastic day.
And remember, the next section starts with a new link, so visit the links page. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Claudia, and thank you, Dane.